Aubrey, can you send me an email? All right, let's take a look at what is due this week. Assignments due by Sunday, October 11th at 11:59 p.m. Complete the Common Lit assessment questions for the open window. Complete the discussion questions on Google Classroom for the open window. 15 minutes of MemBean, 3 days a week for 45 minutes total for 15 points. And then something new, complete the Edpuzzle questions for the open window. So if you go here, right here is how you get onto the Edpuzzle. Then you have your Common Lit. Right here is your discussion questions. Not too bad. All right, let's go ahead and log into Common Lit. Go to the open window. Looks like there's only 4 assessment questions.
The Open Window by H. Monroe, or pen name Saki. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by April Lowe. The Open Window. "My aunt will be down presently, Mr. Nuttall," said a very self-possessed young lady of 15. "In the meantime you must try and put up with me." Frampton Nuttall endeavored to say the correct something which should duly hatter the niece of the moment without unduly discounting the aunt that was to come. Privately, he doubted more than ever whether these formal visits on a succession of total strangers would do much towards helping the nerve cure which he was supposed to be undergoing. "I know how it will be," his sister had said when he was preparing to migrate to this rural retreat. "You will bury yourself down there and not speak to a living soul, and your nerves will be worse than ever from moping. I shall just give you letters of introduction to all the people I know there. Some of them, as far as I can remember, were quite nice." Frampton wondered whether Mrs. Sappleton, the lady to whom he was presenting one of the letters of introduction, came into the nice division. "Do you know many of the people around here?" asked the niece, when she judged that they had had sufficient silent communion. "Hardly a soul," said Frampton. "My sister was staying here at the rectory, you know, some 4 years ago, and she gave me letters of introduction to some of the people here." He made the last statement in a tone of distinct regret. "Then you know practically nothing about my aunt," pursued the self-possessed young lady. "Only her name and address," admitted the caller. He was wondering whether Mrs. Sappleton was in the married or widowed state. An undefinable something about the room seemed to suggest masculine habitation. "Her great tragedy happened just 3 years ago," said the child. "That would be since your sister's time." "Her tragedy?" asked Frampton. Somehow in this restful country spot tragedies seemed out of place. "You may wonder why we keep that window wide open on an October afternoon," said the niece, indicating a large French window that opened onto a lawn. "It is quite warm for the time of the year," said Frampton. "But has that window got anything to do with the tragedy?" "Out through that window, 3 years ago today, her husband and her 2 young brothers went off for their day's shooting. They never came back. In crossing the moor to their favorite snipe shooting ground, they were all 3 engulfed in a treacherous piece of bog. It had been that dreadful wet summer, you know, and places that were safe in other years gave way suddenly without warning. Their bodies were never recovered. That was the dreadful part of it." Here the child's voice lost its self-possessed note and became falteringly human. "Poor aunt always thinks that they'll come back some day. They and the little brown spaniel that was lost with them. and walk in at that window just as they used to do. That is why the window is kept open every evening till it is quite dusk. Poor dear aunt, she has often told me how they went out, her husband with his white waterproof coat over his arms, and Ronnie, her youngest brother, singing "Bertie, why do you bound," as he always did to tease her, because she said it got on her nerves. Do you know, sometimes on still, quiet evenings like this, I almost get a creepy feeling that they will all walk in through that window. She broke off with a little shudder. It was a relief to Frampton when the aunt bustled into the room with a whirl of apologies for being late in making her appearance. "I hope Vera has been amusing you," she said. "She has been very interesting," said Frampton. "I hope you don't mind the open window," said Mrs. Sappleton briskly. "My husband and brothers will be home directly from shooting, and they always come in this way. They've been out for snipe in the marshes today, so they'll make a fine mess over my poor carpets. So like you men folk, isn't it?" She rattled on cheerfully about the shooting, and the scarcity of birds, and the prospects for duck in the winter. To Frampton it was all purely horrible. He made a desperate but only partially successful effort to turn the talk onto a less ghastly topic. He was conscious that his hostess was giving him only a fragment of her attention, and her eyes were constantly straying past him to the open window and the lawn beyond. It was certainly an unfortunate coincidence that he should have paid his visit on this tragic anniversary. "The doctors agree in ordering me complete rest, an absence of mental excitement, and avoidance of anything in the nature of violent physical exercise," announced Frampton, who labored under the tolerably widespread delusion that total strangers and chance acquaintances are hungry for the least detail of one's ailments and infirmities, their cause and cure. "On the matter of diet they are not so much in agreement," he continued. "No?" said Mrs. Sappleton in a voice which only replaced a yawn at the last moment. Then she suddenly brightened into alert attention, but not to what Frampton was saying. "Here they are at last!" she cried. "Just in time for tea, and don't they look as if they were muddy up to the eyes?" Frampton shivered slightly and turned towards the niece with a look intended to convey sympathetic comprehension. The child was staring out through the open window with a dazed horror in her eyes. In a chill shock of nameless fear, Frampton swung round in his seat, looked in the same direction. In the deepening twilight, 3 figures were walking across the lawn towards the window. They all carried guns under their arms, and one of them was additionally burdened with a white coat hung over his shoulders. A tired brown spaniel kept close at their heels. Noiselessly they neared the house, and then a hoarse young voice chanted out of the dusk, "I said, Bertie, why don't you bound?" Frampton grabbed wildly at his stick and hat. The hall door, the gravel drive, and the front gate were dimly noted stages in his headlong retreat. A cyclist coming along the road had to run into the hedge to avoid imminent collision. "Here we are, my dear," said the bearer of the white mackintosh, coming in through the window. "Fairly muddy, but most of it's dry. Who was that who bolted out as we came up?" "A most extraordinary man, Mr. Nuttall," said Mrs. Sappleton. "Could only talk about his illness, and dashed off without a word of good-bye or apology when you arrived. One would think he had seen a ghost." "I expect it was the spaniel," said the niece calmly. "He told me he had a horror of dogs. He was once hunted into a cemetery somewhere on the banks of the Ganges by a pack of pariah dogs, and had to spend the night in a newly dug grave with the creatures snarling and grinning and foaming just above him. Enough to make anyone lose their nerve." Romance at short notice was her specialty. End of The Open Window. Recording by April Lowe.
All right, we're gonna watch the video.
Shooting. They never came back. My aunt will be down presently, Mr. Nuttall. In the meantime, you must try and put up with me.
It is very kind of you to wait with me. Your aunt, Mrs. Sappleton. I'm looking forward to meeting her, I'm sure.
Do you know many of the people around here?
Hardly a soul, I'm afraid. My sister stayed at the rectory 4 years ago, and she's given me some letters of introduction.
Oh.
Oh?
Then you know practically nothing about my aunt?
I know her name and address.
Her great tragedy happened just 3 years ago. That would be after your sister's time.
Her tragedy?
You may wonder why we keep these French doors open on such a cold afternoon.
It is quite warm for the time of year.
Out through those doors, 3 years ago to a day, my aunt's husband and her 2 sons went off for their day's shooting. They never came back. Crossing the moor to their favourite snipe shooting ground, all 3 were engulfed in a treacherous piece of bog. Their bodies were never recovered. That was the awful part of it. No grave, no marker. Poor aunt thinks that they will come back someday. They and a little brown Labrador that was lost with them, and walk in as they used to. She spends hours sitting, waiting, watching through the open doors. She won't allow them to be shut until it's dark outside. Oh, I'm sorry. Do sit down, Mr. Nuttall. That was done shortly before they... Poor dear aunt. She's often told me of how they went out. Her husband with his waterproof coat over his arm, and Ronnie, her eldest son, teasing her. The tea'd better be ready when we return, Mamma, else there'll be hell to pay. Do you know, sometimes, on still, quiet evenings like this, I almost get a feeling that they will all just walk in through those doors.
I'm terribly sorry for keeping you waiting, Mr. Nuttall. I hope Vera has been amusing you.
She has been very interesting.
Oh, I hope you don't mind the French doors. My husband and my sons will be home directly from shooting, and they always come in this way. They've been out for snipe in the marshes today, so they'll make a fine mess of my carpets. Typical of you menfolk, isn't it?
They're calling it nervous exhaustion. It's in the family. As you know, my sister...
Is the tea ready? Make sure it is. I seem to remember your sister. Yes. Sweet lady. Yes, your sort don't come down so much anymore. I hope your stay will be peaceful. Are you a shooting man, Mr. Nuttall? Milk?
Just a little.
It hasn't been the same these last few years. The rain and the mud, you see. It's made an infernal quagmire at the marshes.
The doctors agree in ordering me complete rest. An absence of mental excitement and anything in the nature of violent physical exercise. On the subject of diet, though, they're not in such agreement.
No. Oh, here they are at last. And don't they look as if they're muddy up to the eyes?
Tea, better be ready, Mama.
Oh, you're covered in mud.
Oh, fairly muddy, my dear, but most of it's dry. They'll need to get used to it if we go to war.
Oh, please, let's not talk about that.
We'll be home by Christmas, you'll see. Check.
Who was that who bolted out as we came up?
The most extraordinary man, a Mr. Nuttall. He talked about nothing but his illnesses, and then he dashed off without a word of goodbye or apology when you came in.
I expect it was the Labrador. He told me he had a horror of dogs. He was once hunted into a cemetery on the banks of the Ganges by a pack of pariah dogs and had to spend the night in a newly dug grave with the creatures snarling and grinning and foaming just above him. Enough to make anyone lose their nerve, I dare say.
You could also do the open window multiple choice true false questions. Here you're just going to highlight in red if it's true, green if it's false. And then you're going to have your writing assignment. We can talk more about that next time. All right, I'll go ahead and let you get started. You're going to do the assessment questions on Common Lit, and then your discussion questions, and also the Ed puzzle. Since we've already read it, you can actually move fast forward to the questions, like as you're watching it. And then you're going to complete the discussion questions. All right, send me an email if you have any issues or any questions, and we will see you on Friday. Have a great night.